I'm from this. Yep, get it.
All right. So we are back after a long layoff with the X-Files. This is Darren, and Oleg is with me as well. And wow, with no training being able to be done at this point, this is kind of my outlet. So it's good to connect back and be able to talk shop again. How are you doing, brother?
I'm fine, thank you, and thank you again for inviting me here. So, taking into consideration the situation in both our countries, well, it's I'm very glad and happy that we can afford this X Files sport again.
Yeah, exactly. Oleg and I have both, for those uninitiated and for those listening, have had a lot um, of changes um, and alterations in the countries that we live in. He in Belarus and myself in Costa Rica. Over the last few months, the playing field has definitely changed in both places. So, I mean, we've decided on that note that the topic of this pod is, I mean, we are 6 months into the pandemic now, actually almost 7, I believe. Am I correct? By now, it would probably be almost 7.
Dependent on the country and the exact curfew time, but yep, something like half a year.
Here we started in mid-March officially, so I mean it's over the 6 month period already. So I mean generally
we started from we started officially from February, so yeah, something like that.
So we're over half a year, regardless of perspective of where
Yeah.
you're looking at this from. So, I mean, that was a good time to take stock on. I mean, there were a lot of assessments made at the beginning of the pandemic on the type of violence that was going to be happen, the stability of society, how civilians were going to change as this dragged on and economies started lagging, and the threat of economic disaster started rising to meet the perceived threat of the virus itself. And now we're firmly entrenched in that element, both here and there. So now's a good time to take stock because, as I was saying, a lot of predictions were made on the type of violence and risk and threat and conflict that was coming down the pipe. And while we still have a long ways to go, and there are a lot of developments that are developing, and Oleg and I have talked off audio about that as well, and the potential for a lot of different things is very omnipresent. I think a lot of dynamics have shown themselves now on a day-to-day basis on the type of violence and risk and threat that we're seeing in a lot of countries. And while those countries may change, each country kind of, you know, has its own base now that's been established on elements that have changed during the pandemic, on specific types of violence or crime or threat. Let's start with you, Oleg. I'll give you the floor first. I mean, are there things that people generally predicted or were concerned about or conspiracy theoreticized in the beginning of the pandemic that have turned out to be false? And what are some of the things in Belarus, types of you know, that kind of violence that have been surprisingly present based on the dynamics of what's happening?
First of all our violence dynamics is not connected to COVID at all. But I can say about one prediction that was true. For our country, it was not so deadly as it was stated before. It's for the first, and for the second, our healthcare system, surprisingly, to be frank, really surprisingly, was and is still able to cope with it almost without any additional capacities. So, well, they rebranded a few clinics to deal with COVID, and that's all. everything is stable. Yep, the amount of ill people increases, but still there is no lack of places, lack of hospitals, lack of doctors, etc. Everything is quite all right and not worse than during any other epidemic stuff that we have. For example, we have seasonal epidemic increase of flu and pneumonia. It's the usual thing in the beginning of the winter, so actually no difference.
Mhm.
So that is a positive thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've surprised here too with how long that we've held out. I mean, it was expected to the healthcare system, I mean, be overloaded by now. Excuse me. The type of,
No
the
problem.
quality of Medicare and the type of doctor that we have here is very high caliber. Most of them have training in North America or Europe. So, I mean, you know, the caliber is very high. The system itself, we are, as of yesterday, I think it's 72% capacity. And up until now, they've been fortunate enough to open a few new wings out of necessity. But apparently that space is gradually running out and the numbers are continuing to climb. So um, we'll see. I mean, one of the risks apart from the virus with an overloaded healthcare system is that if you have other areas of concern, like you break a leg, have a heart attack, have ongoing cancer treatments, for instance, they are moving all of their resources to COVID at this point. So, I mean, that's how it can affect average people that don't have the virus or aren't even threatened by it, is that as a byproduct of having a different major issue, you may have extra time added to the accessibility to proper care. You may have extra time added to being in an ICU if needed, or having accessibility to a professional or a specialist to deal with things as resources get moved solely to the pandemic and to the virus. So I mean, the idea that, I mean, it's 99% and it will only affect, you know, the high risk people is kind of a mythology because it has the potential to affect lots of other people that don't get it. And you know, one of the things too that I keep thinking as everybody talks about this, 99% survival rate, which is inaccurate in and of itself. But, you know, we have here, at least, we have a lot of people that mock the fact that the most vulnerable people are the people that have high risks and screw them. People that are overweight or have diabetes or high blood pressure or whatever the case may be. And the problem is that documented statistics in this country, 50% plus of the entire population of 4 million in the country are considered in that high risk category. So you're looking at half the population that has serious vulnerability. So, I mean, it's not as easy as just, you know, the things that people claim on social media. It rarely is, but I mean, talk is talk, I guess, unless you really understand the dynamics of what you're saying.
Yeah, well, social media, in my opinion, has already started being a playground for different hype things and other um, tricks, mental tricks, social engineering, and all that stuff. So, from my perspective, social media posts about anything have very, very little part of the truth in them. Sorry.
Yeah, in a way, it's starting to become a caricature, or at least very one-dimensional in terms of the perspective that people are peddling. But I mean, we here, I mean, here's an example too that I'll get into, and then I'll throw the floor to you again. The murder rate here was expected to explode um, as the pandemic has moved on, and it still has that potential. I mean, it always does. Let's be honest and call a spade a spade. But what we've heard is that law enforcement the government, the general public have claimed that the murder rate is up from last year, and that's of concern. And when you consider that people have been on lockdown and in quarantine for a long time, and at various points here, the percentage that the murder rate has increased is noticeable, but it's hardly an explosion. When I hear that law enforcement is telling government people that they need an influx of money and manpower to manage the explosion of murder rate, that to me is generally a ploy to get a pay increase, because the murder rate is not reflective of any type of explosion. I think as of a month ago, I think at the 4.5 month mark, I think it had increased by 13. And that's not 13 percentage points, that's 13 murders from the exact same time last year. So all in all, considering the level of violence in Central America in general, an increase of 13 to me is hardly an explosion. We haven't been bombarded with a heavy barrage of murders, and the murder rate hasn't, really bombarded society the way some of the professionals would have you believe.
People, it's also, well, it's again my opinion, and I think that people who are talking about explosions, they either do not know shit about statistics or know it very, very well, because there is a significant difference between a spike and an explosion. And in the majority of cases, when they say explosion, we can see a pipe.
Yep.
And that is no more than a simple hype, or an attempt to drive attention to some financial stuff, like give me a bit more financial support to research this problem or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, as the stress and tension have gone up, I could see how an overworked or overstressed law enforcement officer
but it's
could
not
handle a pay increase or more manpower to assist and alleviate some of that stress. And, even a small spike can be a good cause to back that into your marketing campaign.
No, of course.
But a 13 number difference here is hardly something, especially during a pandemic where a big bombardment was expected, is hardly something to lose a ton of sleep over. Do you have to be aware of the increase or the spike? Yeah, sure. But I don't knee-jerk change my planning because of a 13-person spike at the halfway point of a major pandemic. I mean, to me, that, all life is to be respected. I'm not downplaying that at all, but considering all the intangibles going on here, that's not a bad outcome. I mean, if all we have increased is 13 from the same point last year, and we have an economic tanking in the country, I'd say that's pretty acceptable in terms of levels. I mean, I, for one, when I looked at the statistics, thought they would have been way worse. So I was pleasantly surprised that it had only gone up minutely from the year before. I mean, that's how I looked at it. While everybody else was going, holy shit, this is deteriorating into total chaos. I mean, the data doesn't reflect that. Sorry. At least not from where I'm sitting.
Data?
Well, I think data can be very helpful, but you have to know how to read it. I mean, we talked once about how important data.
How many people?
Yeah, about how data assessment and statistical understanding and study research are so important during this time, and people don't do that. They hear the surface level, they hear the hyperbole that goes along with it from whatever body stands to
Sorry for
benefit from it,
interrupting
and then
you,
they run with that
but,
idea.
Darren, sorry for
What's
interrupting
that?
you. Otherwise, I will forget it. Talking about statistics, I can
Shoot.
recommend a very, very good read. Uh, I don't remember who the author is, but the title of the book is How to Lie with Statistics.
I've heard of it. I have not read it, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
No, no, highly recommend. A very, very good read. And you do not need any threshold pass, knowing some basic statistics theory. It is a very well and easy written.
Hmm. I've studied a lot on
Sorry.
statistics, so for me, I mean, I've been fortunate in that whenever a study or statistics or data comes out, um, I find it very easy to see the important parts and to see the restrictive elements and to see who's utilizing them and for what. Um, I think that's a very important thing. I mean, either you choose to delve into those areas and learn fast what to deduce from them, or you don't look at them at all and choose to live under a rock because they have the potential to ruin your peace of mind very quickly.
Yeah. Or otherwise, like in a very old joke about two statisticians and the wild boar. Do you know it?
No, that one I haven't heard. Fire away.
Uh, Two experts in statistics went hunting. They saw a wild boar. One took his rifle, shot, missed to the right of the boar. Another one took his rifle, shot, and missed, missed as well, but to the left of the boar. Then the first one recharges his rifle, starts aiming, and the second one said, "Oh, come on! Statistically, we have killed them."
Yeah. Yeah, that sums up a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a very wise joke.
Well, yeah, it is. Yeah. But here you see a lot of tension. I mean, every day at 1:30 p.m., the health minister comes out with the latest statistics on um, the current number of cases, the current number of people that have passed, the mortality rate. Um, so I mean it. People tend to panic when they hear that, oh wow, there were 1,400 new cases yesterday. But if 20 people died, and most of those cases are minor, the statistics you have to look at are the mortality rate, the people filling up the ICUs, and the case number is kind of fear-mongering. Um, it's good to know the cases, but the cases are the cases. I mean, the cases don't really reflect what is
Of course,
actually happening.
agreed. Agreed.
Um, One of the things here that I like that one of the main periodicals posts is that if you want to, I mean, this is not as bad generally as people may think, but if you want to compare it to it's just the flu, I mean, in the country last year, we had, I think it was 37 people that passed away from respiratory related illnesses. And in the first half year this year, we've had 700 plus pass from the virus. So, I mean, it's not the flu. Um, but considering the mortality rate in the country here, it's also not the other end of the spectrum either. Um, so, I mean, whatever you think of the conspiracy idea or the hoax or whatever the case may be, how serious you think the virus is, the healthcare system overloading or exploding has the potential to really affect a lot of different people outside of the virus's capability entirely. So that's a risk. Um, as the healthcare system starts getting overloaded, people start taking less chances and doing fewer stupid things and uh, less dumb human tricks out of concern for that byproduct of that. But um, statistics can be very easily manipulated, as we saw with law enforcement and that element before. Um, a 13-person increase, and therefore, we need a dramatic shift in investment and manpower. Um, I get the dynamic. I get why those statistics are utilized and for what purpose. Everybody's struggling here right now. But as time goes on, as you and I have talked about, the greater threat by far is going to be the economic tanking. That is going to supersede the virus at some point on a rather large scale. Um, so, I mean, the thing is that it still is chalked up to the pandemic. That's what people don't think. I mean, these people that fall through the cracks with a medical system where all the resources have been directed elsewhere, and they have a legitimate, other problem. People dying from starvation and hunger, or being, homeless, or losing their house, or having their business and future and finances destroyed. Those are things that are going to start accumulating as time goes by, and they're going to have a far greater effect than the 700 people that have passed so far, or the number of people in the ICU. And this is all from the pandemic. You can all chalk this up to the pandemic. It's one big thing that is directly proportional to the pandemic occurring. People may not die from the virus, but they will die from pandemic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, agreed. And I can add that the pandemic itself has various consequences in very, very different areas of life.
Yes.
So we should consider the death rate not only from virus itself, but from different alongside things like starvation, homelessness, simple lack of healthcare
Hygiene.
in time due to
Yep.
the busyness, lack of hygiene, all that stuff.
Yep. Well, I mean, I have a number of things here that I've been studying within the country relating to violent crime and crime that has directly been influenced due to the pandemic, and I'm sure you've done the same there. Um, Here we have a number of things that you can certainly attribute to the pandemic. They're not virus related directly, but they have been, we've seen an increase and a dramatic shift with some of these types of violence directly because of the pandemic. One of the things, there was just a massive feminist march downtown San Jose a couple of weeks ago, which is good because a lot of the women are getting sick of what's happening here. And what's happening here is you're seeing femicide and domestic violence cases and deaths, murders skyrocket. That is one element of that murder rate that has gone up exponentially as lockdowns have occurred. I mean, couples are trapped in their homes for long periods of time on end without the ability to separate. If the stress rises exponentially, people are trapped together. Alcoholism rises, aggression and frustration build. So I mean, that part, the femicide and the domestic violence, where women have been a direct target of angry, frustrated men, has been a rather big thing here. And we had a massive march downtown San Jose the other day in regards to that. So that's an element that has really risen, and it's directly because of the pandemic, because people are forced to stay home. They have no outlet anymore. If you could, people that could have gone to the gym or out for a run or out for the guys to watch the football game or to the bar to have a few beers are now stuck in home, and now all their aggression and frustration is in the same place where it often originated from. So, I mean, that is one element for sure that has been on the increase. Missing women and child trafficking. And this one is kind of multifaceted. People on the outside just chalk it up to the number of statistics, the number of people that have gone missing. But there are some interesting dichotomies and dynamics that are happening within that as to why it's happening. For instance, poor families here have been known to sell or rent their young daughter to foreigners for extra or desperation money when they're not being able to feed their family or put food on the table or maintain a shelter or whatever the case may be, whether it's temporarily or permanently. I mean, either way you look at it, it's sexual assault, it's human trafficking, it's prostitution, however you want to stack it up. But a growing number of women here have subtly gone missing. And you're seeing regularly every couple of days on Facebook, there's a new one that has gone missing. And they all tend to have the same profile. They're young, they're underage, they're pretty, they come from poverty. So it's not an opportunistic or coincidence. I mean, these things are happening because these organizations move in knowing that what the pandemic has done and knowing that young women are far more vulnerable than they would have been before, both from their own family and for themselves, should they be somewhat older and more self-reliant. So those are two examples that, I mean, have unequivocally risen during and because of the pandemic. I mean, there's simply no doubt about it. The statistics back that up as well. Did you want to jump in on those? I have a number more too that, I mean, that's what we had kind of decided to talk about was that, what? Go ahead.
Yeah, the fact is that here the additional effects of the pandemic are not very vivid. And we do not have any increase of domestic violence just because the overall mentality here, people are usually, well, they're not violent in general. So they can curse, they can shout at each other, but very, very rarely it goes to violence.
Good.
And currently we have riots here, so partially they are caused by the pandemics, I guess, because from what I think now, the government here did not expect that so many people would go protesting because of the COVID, but the people did. And the law enforcement agencies are usually not ready just because they don't know shit in their job.
Yep.
And all that stuff. So, yep, with to some extent, we can say that the seriousness of the today's situation is partially caused by the COVID.
I wonder, from what you've told me, if the government, I mean, the election was planned sometime before, obviously, so I mean, that's kind of a stretch, but I mean, clearly political bodies take advantage of the time, knowing that people are trapped inside their house and unifying en masse or coming together for singular purpose is much more difficult now, which allows governments to take more advantage and more liberties than they may have otherwise.
Yes, I guess that was their plan. But that plan failed, obviously.
Yep, they misread the public.
Again, one positive thing. Now, when there was the first spike of the pandemic, our government did not allow the healthcare ministry to publish real numbers of death rates and of ill people, the amount of ill people. And when the riots began, the focus of media shifted to the riots, and now the healthcare department uses this situation to publish more or less reliable numbers. So it's something like that.
But your levels
Big Brother
of
is, Big Brother
have
is
been
watching in
maintained?
another direction, so you can you can afford to tell some truth.
Yeah, notably. The the virus there has kind of taken a back seat to the current political situation, I would sure think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, here, it's very interesting in the type of crime that has risen and why. I mean, I gave those two examples before. Home invasions and robberies are another area that have shown an increase as people are home a lot more, and opportunistic criminals know that they'll have money because people are trying to stay away from credit cards right now based on the fact that some of the banks have closed shop and destroyed people's credit cards, knowing that they may rack up money on the card that they may not otherwise have in cash. Um, Credit card also allows the government to track transactions and keep a very close tab on how you're making your money and when it's not taxed. As I said before, there's a lot of little black markets and microeconomies and under the table interactions that are happening here. Those happen instinctively the minute people don't trust the government or think that the government is trying to implement something that they shouldn't, which they are here at times. So people know that people are going to have money, their cell phones, their laptops, their PCs, credit cards. I mean, all of these things are going to be at home with the people now during various lockdowns and quarantines. So criminals have been acting accordingly on that. That's another area where I think a general view, what I've done is tried to look at these things as to why they are happening and where you have to put your resources to prevent those things from happening. That's kind of the value that I find in that. To understand the dynamic of what's happening in the country and noting what kind of crime is going to be developing gives you a leg up in terms of how you're going to do your planning and prepping for potential things. If you've invested all of your time into street violence and these things happen in far different patterns than that element, you're not really staying ahead of the curve in any way because the psychology and the tactics are very different in terms of defending in each one. Scams have skyrocketed. Online identity theft and hacking and phishing scams and seniors being called by high pressure people that are trying to, in the name of how do I word it? Putting all your debt in one area. So they'll ask you to transfer all
Oh
of
yeah,
your
yeah.
energy and
You
gas
wrote about
information
you
to them
posted
so that
about
they
it.
can. What's
Yeah,
that?
you posted about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, those kind of scams and identity scams. We have a well-known scam in the country right now where people from jail are calling you and claiming to be part of the Department of Health or the Department of Finance and asking you for your social security or your cedula, your ID number, and trying to get you to send money for an outstanding debt that you owe, or they're going to guarantee your wages and things like that. But those are generally, you can see those coming. I mean, if you know what questions to ask, those are nullified fairly quickly.
Yeah,
I got a
of
call
course.
from one of those guys who was highly pressuring me to give information, and I asked him, you know that these government departments never ever call you personally, right? He was like,
Of course.
well, and I said, how's jail treating you? He was like, oh, fuck you, and hung up the phone. So, I mean, those you can figure out fairly quickly. They usually prey on people that are far more vulnerable, like seniors and the aged,
Yeah.
uh, by
I
design,
once had
of
a
course.
similar conversation with a guy from a jail. He was also a telephone scam, but I replied in the manner and in the sub-language of jail inmates. And we even just talked very friendly without scamming.
Maybe you,
Respect
like
and
I
all
had
that
said, maybe you
stuff.
got his credit card information and the last four digits of his
No, I
social
didn't,
security
but
number.
he was just, here. Here it is using the criminal and the special inmate subculture trays or tricks. Usually, it's a very rare thing. And in the majority, 99% of cases, if you use this kind of language, this kind of stuff, you were in jail at least once in your life.
Yeah.
And the so-called inmate brotherhood is forever here.
Okay.
So if one inmate meets another inmate, they usually are not friends, but they treat each other with respect.
There's a mutual respect back
Yeah,
and
the
forth where the scam has
mutual
inevitably ended.
respect. Yeah, yeah, and thus it was just a small talk
Yeah.
about how is the situation in jail nowadays. Do they treat you well, bro? And
The
it's
situation in jail nowadays. Yeah.
well,
Like all of a sudden
here,
now they have a welcome bottle of champagne upon arrival.
for example.
Yeah. But I mean, as you're seeing a shift in some elements of business too, like home-based business and people working from home now I mean, that is the trend out of necessity. But I mean, whether that
Yes,
will be a
and
continuing trend in the future or not, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that it will be. This has kind of made a shift in the method, maybe not the business itself, but the methodology of distributing that business. And as long as those people are working
yeah,
from home in a massive manner, or having a home-based business, the scam calls on the phones to the home are going to be frequent. One goes up
yeah,
exponentially as the other rises. So
and
that's to be planned
this
as well.
area, from my perspective, this area can be fruitful in the nearest future.
Yeah,
At least we in the company that I am working for, that I'm a part of, we are now thinking of monetizing that digitalization of business. And
yeah.
well,
There's
we
a
have
big paradigm shift.
a couple of good solutions that are already working. So, well, it's future, I guess.
Yep.
And as for the internet scams and all that stuff, from my perspective, it was expectable because due to the different curfews and self-isolations, people started talking more freely in the internet.
Yep.
I noticed it, and thus, of course, now they can much easier give you necessary information before,
Yep.
just because they have nobody to talk to in their real life.
But data mining is another area that skyrocketed as well. I mean,
Yeah, and
did
I
you
think
notice
that
when the pandemic first hit that?
yep.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that from my perspective, I predict the that these types of crimes, scams, or data mining will only increase in the nearest future. So
Absolutely.
that just need to
Yeah.
be considered, and we need to prepare for it.
But it's amazing how manipulatable the majority of people are to data mining and to phone scams and things like that. They plan for the physical attack, but they have really no solution and get busted all the time on the things that they tend to ignore. The data mining, I mean, I know a lot of industry professionals that when the pandemic first hit and they were bored and, you know, idle hands do idle things, take part in these defining tests. Like what kind of Game of Thrones character are you? And what predatory animal do you represent? And to get
Yeah.
that statistic, or to get that information, you have to give a number of different personal things, um,
Yeah.
or you don't get the result. And people don't acknowledge, they think it's just a fun game online, and we sacrifice a little bit of privacy and a few personal details, but generally it's a fun thing, and I get to post to my friends that I'm a wolf. And I mean,
Yeah.
in the meantime, you've been data mined. um,
Yeah.
and these are cumulative data building processes where they're sold en masse with other data mining sources to very nefarious people a lot of the time, that build a pretty accurate profile of the people that they're scoping out, um, often within the country and within a relatively achievable locale from where you are. And people don't get that. I mean, I've had to post on my timeline, please stop sending me this bullshit. I'm not filling it out. I don't give a fuck if I'm a wolf, or a leopard or a lion. And stop being
Come
so
on, but
vulnerable
you
about
don't.
getting scammed. You guys are industry professionals. What's that?
Come on, you don't.
By the way, I just wanted to let you
Everyone
know
wants.
I'm a lion.
Everyone wants to be a wolf in the world of sheep or something like that. They used to say.
Yeah, yeah. What I find comical is I had one guy tell me that he was a wolf, and I said, what would happen if I defined myself as a sheep? I defined myself as a sheep and I crushed you. What does it say about your wolf? Just something to ponder, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think about how many different ways that a person can uh, dominate another person, and all of a sudden your little label and definition is kind of moot. But anyways, digressing. It's all stupid.
In these cases, I
Um,
usually say
yeah.
that I identify myself as a honey badger. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. I'm a rat. While you're a wolf and will die in the apocalypse, I'll still be crawling through the other end. So survival is multifaceted. Anyways, no, another area here that has gone up has been police corruption. I mean, you're seeing, like I had mentioned to you, we've heard a number of
Yeah,
things on the crime pages here about cops
it's
being called into a home
the
invasion
scourge of
or
third
something
world
like that.
countries.
Yeah, and they'll show up at the house and end up stealing some of the content, and robbing the people while they're there, and the other person is taking notes or whatever. There are bribe stops, at different intersections and things like that, shakedowns, payoffs. Cops aren't paid nearly the amount of money they are here in North America, so they're desperate like everybody else, and that has to be taken into consideration. It happened before the pandemic, but it's happening more now. Uh, as law enforcement budgets have been cut and officers are working longer hours, they have to find different ways to make up for that money, and that's usually at the expense of uh, the civilian population. So, I mean, it's something you have to be prepared for. Um, it can catch you completely off guard if all of a sudden you get stopped and you have no idea how to
No,
manage
no.
or respond. We've had it twice in the last month already. Sorry?
Well, it was just from my perspective of the political situation here. You said that you could be taken aback if they stop you and you have no, and I said knife.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're toolless, you're more vulnerable.
Yeah.
No, but those are the type of risks that I think people don't plan for. I always hear people talking online, waiting for the coming storm. And the storm is here. It's just that you're missing a lot of the little micro storms that
Yeah.
are happening to make the big one. Um, that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, I see a ton of industry people that are predicting this big civil war in so many different countries, or some global world war, involving Russia and China and the U.S. And in the meantime, they're ignoring all of these tons of things that are happening along the way that they could have prevented and had an
Huge.
impact on.
Well,
I can't control the global scene,
huge
so I mean
ideas
it's
makes
all hearsay
a
rhetoric.
bright picture. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
Uh, Third World
yeah.
War.
Well, you're
Everyone,
preparing for the
everyone dies.
apocalypse.
Zombie apocalypse, etc. It's a huge picture, and it makes the vision brighter, more interesting, more fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
And another thing, unfortunately, I can say that it's in our nature to think that we are one and the only. And of course, a person such brilliant as me should be involved in nothing less than World War III or zombie apocalypse. Otherwise, it doesn't suit me.
yeah, exactly. You know what, man? I have a psychological theory on that. I think a lot of people don't admit to really struggling during this crisis. I think they are not managing their mental state, their self-reflection, their ability to cope very well. And since a lot of these things, like the economy, the virus, the effects of the pandemic, the internal strife that people are going through are invisible, it's far easier, especially for men, to make a tangible enemy. Um, to look at things like a world war and be anti-government, or to build conspiracy theory or talk about the coming storm, it all makes your enemy or your opponent tangible, actual, real. Um, Not something that is out of your control. So the minute you humanize or um, put a face to an enemy, it gives people comfort. It's something that they can fight and prepare for. Whereas a lot of these things um, are a different type of risk and threat. Um, and I think that's where somebody who has holistic skill sets in risk instead of just fighting capacity has a big edge. Um, we all have down days where we're, bummed or depressed or tired or frustrated, but uh, generally the minute you acknowledge that this is a battle of attrition, this isn't a physical, mano a mano thing for the most part, and there are a lot of things along the way that aren't physical in nature, and that sometimes an enemy can be invisible. To acknowledge these things is to understand them and to prepare for them. But I see a lot of industry people that are freaking out right now because they are incapable of dealing with that unsurety or that invisible opponent. So they try and make an opponent. And I think that's also human nature. Like you were saying, I think it's very normal for people to try and cope with something they're not good at or don't understand or can't materialize into something that they can. You know what I mean? How do you want to jump in there?
Nope, I agree totally. And
You can't
well,
fight a virus or an economy. You can't fight physically homelessness or hunger. Um, you can't
yeah,
fight
and
physically fear or anxiety.
it was, from my perspective, it's an overall problem because the majority of us, of people, preparing for some physical encounter of some enemy or war or something like that, and the realities of pandemic, for example, they show that physical skills are not viable in this kind of situation. And besides that, you should know how to deal with anxiety, as you said it, or panic, or fear, or just simple stress of not being able to control the situation. So it is also it should have been a part of the training, but of course it's not self-defense, it's some boring shit.
Yeah, isn't that the case? Yeah, that is generally the bottom line with a lot of it. But that's another, I mean, suicide is considered a violent crime. I mean, to self. Suicide rates
Yeah.
here have gone up as well, predominantly by men who, you know, with the machismo that permeates society here, that's so ingrained here, the ability to, you know, the inability to provide for your family or lose your house or your job has a profoundly negative effect on a lot of men. So that's another, you know, risk to self. And I don't think people prepare for that one either. What we're also seeing is a lot of desperate people that, you know, regularly, generally in better times, law-abiding citizens that need to resort to crime, and they themselves are being recruited by criminal organizations and gangs out of desperation to get some kind of money. That was covered in one of the media outlets here too, where a lot of average working men, generally men, have been recruited by gangs and criminal organizations to do various activities for them. And the organizations know too that people are going to come calling that usually wouldn't be, because they have work to be done, and if you're desperate enough, you'll do it. So I mean, their business has maintained stability throughout this, which gives the chances of, you know, greater societal violence because of that. I mean, obviously that's a byproduct of it. As the criminal organizations stabilize and find different ways to recruit people that are fairly innocuous to the outside eye, they strengthen. And as different groups strengthen, they compete for overlapping territory or resources. So does the potential for greater violence in society, you know, even that is caused by the pandemic. Does that have a chance to affect the overall society's level of aggression? Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, that is a distinct possibility. We have had, like I was telling you, we've had some violent protests in front of the presidential house where some explosives were lit off underneath law enforcement vehicles, and there was some aggression and physical assault towards media members for hyperbolizing things. But generally, that hasn't been too bad. The Women's March was very controlled and very calm as well. You know, we have a country directly next door where there's noted xenophobia from both sides. And they have a country with a dictator who has generally abandoned his people. So like I was telling you, I think the last time we talked, we have a lot of illegal entry here from Nicaraguans that are desperate to make money and be hired and access the medical system here that they're not allowed to or able to access back home. An ex-president here and his organization is now claiming that the Nicaraguan government has been hacking their databases for his corporation as well. And that one, though it would be easy to chalk that one up to, yeah, of course Nicaragua would do that, of course Ortega would do that. There's also the skepticism that it's a very opportune time politically to create greater tension for the current government as a third party, to blame somebody who everybody would accept as being truth. But it just seems to me personally that the timing is particularly perfect to create growing tension, to remove the current government or to build tension between nations for an opportunity to seize some kind of benefit. You know, that to me isn't lost on me, whereas a lot of other people seem to go, oh yeah, of course. I mean, Nicaraguans, what can you do, right? And generally it's not that smooth. I mean, it would be perfectly logical for Nicaragua to do that, almost too perfectly logical at this moment in time. So, I mean, those are little political plays that it pays to be aware of. Can you control them? No. What's that?
Yep, we have, as I wrote, as we talked about it, we have more or less the same situation where the current government blames neighboring countries in all their losses and fails.
Are you able to expand on that at all, or not particularly
Well,
at
I
this moment?
can. There is a tradition here. The local leader, well, as soon as I'm not a citizen of Belarus, I can allow myself everything.
Hmm.
Well, we usually have here a great arch enemy. Uh, it is NATO,
Hmm.
and that arch enemy impersonated in Poland is usually the root cause of all the shit that's going on in the country. Like, no, it's not the lack of management skills, it's not the lack of money, it's not the lack of specialists, not the lack of this, not the lack of that. It's just Polish in spies and saboteurs always.
It's easier to blame others for your lack of success or capability. Yeah.
Yeah. And usually, and it basically, as you said, it's only a half lie, because definitely some neighboring countries, of course, for example, they sponsor some amount of political opposition parties, but their influence on the country's life and even on the country's political climate is is much exaggerated by the government.
Hmm.
I would say very, very exaggerated.
How?
So, well, that uh, all blames are on neighbors in everything. For example, now the protests in the countries are claimed to be sponsored and guided by the neighbors. The strikes on factories are guided by the neighbors, and all that stuff. They're constantly spying on the president. They're constantly spying on the armed forces. They're constantly spying on the police. That's why we need to increase their salaries and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To an extent, I'd say some of that is occurring here as well. How
So
do
yeah,
you
fear
feel that?
mongering in the purest form.
Yeah.
And
How are you generally? Are you?
once
Go ahead.
once in the beginning of that protests, the president even blamed Russia, but Russian guys very quickly explained that if a country is living 50% on Russian money injections, then shut the fuck up, guy.
Yep.
And immediately he found another enemy.
Yep. Yep. How do you feel generally? I mean, this is a question I get asked, and for people like you and I who are in the midst of this kind of element daily, I get asked a lot, how are you doing? Like, are you safe? Because the perception of living in the midst of this um, can sometimes be unsettling if you're on the outside. I mean, the perception of how people are living in the middle of this in a different country where they generally have a lot of benefits that we don't have here, the perspective is lost. So, I mean, for people listening, how do you perceive your safety? Are you generally doing okay
Well,
with what's going on there?
we are doing okay, and funny thing that I de-escalated to the most basic rules, like, and another interesting thing is that now I'm following my gang rules from my youth. Because, well, I mentioned once that it's not all my life that I have been a lawful citizen.
Yeah, no, I
And
certainly,
yeah,
you know,
do not usually, well, the rules are simple. Do not leave home after 5 o'clock in the evening, because the protests rate increases this time. Avoid police. Under no circumstances, do not communicate to the police. So move through the uh, most crowded places where it is difficult to pick you to cherry pick you from the crowd. Uh, use straight lines just from the point A to point B without any curving throughout the city. Try to move through the sleeping areas, because there are lots of yards and lots of places like parks, etc., where you can hide. Just these simple things.
yep.
And once again, avoid the law enforcement by any means. Unfortunately, here it became a reality.
I'd say that that's not really far off with kind of our base daily planning either. I mean, that sounds pretty accurate. Um, I'm gonna have to go here soon because the shift is changing. Um,
Shift on what?
well, I have to get going here. We have some changing dynamics, but um, yeah, I think with the instability in both the countries that we're living in right now, it definitely gets back to base. Um,
Yeah. In our
you
case, to
go
what
back to
extent?
you get back to the things that have traditionally worked and worked repeatedly. And like I was telling you, I
Yeah.
mean, the more exposure you have to elements like this, the more easy the default button becomes to get into that state of mind where you need to and default into the main things that you need to focus on. So it peels away. I mean, for people that are generally new to these sort of things, it's a little bit more difficult, I would say, to customize. And you see that in the comments online that people are kind of like a deer in headlights here in a lot of different ways. So, I mean, just to finish up, because I'm going to have to run quickly here, we have a kind of a situation here. Um, but defining risk and what constitutes risk and threat and danger is one of those things that, whether you're looking at statistics, going out in society, talking online, that I think has become a rather imperative skill set that I think is highly underestimated and people are generally not very good at. Um, Especially those that have never lived through anything traumatic or challenging before. Um, the ability to adapt and be resilient is a lot more difficult. Do you want to add anything on that, or I'm going to have to leave fairly
Nothing
quickly here?
special. Nothing special. Thank you for having invited me,
My
and
pleasure.
send my warmest regards to your wife.
Return
And
to
good
you and
luck.
yours as well.
Thank you so much. And good luck there.
And
Stay
sorry,
safe, brother.
what's that?
And overall, thank you. Stay safe, brother.
You as well. Let's keep in touch and let's do another one when we can. I'm going to have
Yeah.
to run here because,
Sounds like a deal.
yeah, sorry to cut it off short, but such as it is.
Okay.
All right,
Cheers
brother.
then.
Cheers to you. Talk
Bye.
to you soon.